All right, everybody. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We got the Southwest Regional Sportspersons Caucus meeting. Just want to thank everybody who's following along with us on Zoom, as well as we just got our live stream set up on the YouTube channel for Colorado Parks and Wildlife as well. So we'll be monitoring comments and questions that come in both here in the Zoom chat tonight, as well as for those who may be tuning in on Zoom or on YouTube as well. So bear with me as I kind of bounce back and forth between the two platforms and make sure we try to get to everybody who may have questions as they come up tonight. Mia Anstein, I want to thank you for joining us, one of our caucus representatives here tonight, as well as our region manager, Corey Chick. With that, I'll just leave it open for some opening remarks from Mia and Corey.
Yeah, thank you guys for having a caucus again. I always appreciate that you guys do host the event and give sportsmen an outlet to ask questions, which we'll have the panelists answering, and also just a way for others to be informed. And for whoever's watching, my name is Mia Anstein. I'm a regional representative for SCI, which is Safari Club International, and we work on teaching and educating conservation to anybody who'd like to learn. And we also work on humanitarian efforts and habitat and wildlife efforts. So thank you for having me.
And appreciate it, John. Mia, thank you for joining. I think Roger's going to be hopping on here in a little bit too. So preemptive thank you to him as well. Also, Sarah and Danielle Eisenhart being on here. Huge shout out to those two who are going to jump in and give a presentation on a couple topics that I know folks are hoping to hear about. So with that, I think John was going to cover most everything else I was going to cover. So just say thanks. And if we don't hit the mark on what you're hoping to hear, please reach out to us and we'll make sure we'll adjust next meeting. So again, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just continue with wanted to make note at the top of this meeting. I know at the last regional caucus meeting, we talked about new elections for new regional representatives. I know there's been some discussion amongst CPW's leadership as well as our policy and planning folks and our public engagement folks about a few changes to the formats of the regional caucuses moving forward. So this tonight might be the last one of these regional meetings that kind of looks like this. We're a little bit geographically challenged in the Southwest region. The virtual component's given us a nice option to still engage with everybody, but I know we'd like to get out in the public and meet with some more folks face to face moving forward too. There is the statewide Sportspersons Roundtable, which will be held March 1st in Buena Vista. I believe some changes to the overall regional meetings will be discussed more at length at the statewide meeting and how the representatives will roll over if they've been regional representatives onto that statewide roundtable as representatives there. So, Corey, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything more to that, but just wanted to make acknowledgement of that at the top of the show tonight.
I was muted, sorry.
You're all good.
No, I talked to Roger about it a little bit. Mia, I know we hadn't got a chance, but I think we'll learn a little bit more about the new changes coming up and look forward to seeing how those are structured and how we can better serve everyone. So thanks.
The other announcement I wanted to make is a reminder for folks. If you're not, haven't stayed tuned, I guess, to some of the stuff locally here in Durango, there is something everybody should be aware of. The Area 15 Durango Wildlife Office is going to move up to where we're located in our Southwest Region office in the Bodo area of Durango beginning March 3rd until construction will eventually be completed on a new CPW Wildlife Office and a joint region, Southwest Region office down at the Durango Fish Hatchery location. Hoping for construction to begin sometime later this spring or early in the summer, but just taking advantage of a good time to try to move our wildlife customer service staff up to the region office in our annex building that we have up here for the time being, while it's not in the middle of hunting seasons or busier summer seasons for a lot of our wildlife officers. So just want to remind folks, you'll probably see the entrance if you're used to going to the Durango Area Wildlife Office off of, I believe it's 15th Street there off of North Main in Durango. That location will be closed. So if you're looking to buy your fishing licenses or your hunting licenses or help with the big game draw or anything like that after March 3rd, you'll be coming up to the CPW Southwest Region office located up here at 415 Turner Drive in Bodo. And I'll drop in the chat a link if folks want to learn more about that construction project and the new office that'll be constructed there at the Durango Fish Hatchery site. We do have an engaged CPW page that's been posted on that, accepting some public feedback, but also just gives you a chance to see what more of those plans look like and kind of get a little bit more understanding of the history of the property and why that move is being made to get that office done. So with that, I think that covers all the immediate announcements we had for the start of the show. So I want to welcome Sarah Hamming to give us a legislative session update. I know it's been a busy session, busy last few weeks, so we really appreciate Sarah jumping on the show and meeting with everybody to talk about bills that are of interest to Parks and Wildlife.
Yeah, thanks so much, John, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for letting me come chat with you today. As John mentioned, my name is Sarah Hamming, and I'm CPW's legislative analyst. And as you also may know, the legislative session is officially in full swing. So since the first week of January this year, we have seen over 450 bills that have already been introduced. And of those 450 bills, CPW and DNR are actively monitoring about 70 of those bills across all of the DNR divisions. To put that into context, we typically see between 500 to 800 bills introduced in total during the entire 120-day legislative session. So we're very much in the thick of it right now. As for today's call, I'm going to provide just a quick update on CPW's legislative priorities for the year. And then I'll just go into some detail on a few other bills that have been introduced so far this session that I think are going to be of particular interest to this group. And I'm happy to take any questions that folks have on any of the bills that I covered today, or if there's a bill that I didn't mention that you'd like more information on, definitely feel free to put some questions in the chat, or you can always reach out to me afterwards via email, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So starting with CPW's legislative priorities for the year, we are running two bills. First, CPW is running a bill that would waive state park entrance fees for enrolled members of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe. This bill has been formally introduced as House Bill 1163 and is being sponsored by a really strong group of bipartisan legislators that includes Representative Stewart, Representative Taggart, and Senator Roberts and Senator Simpson. So this effort responds to requests from the two Colorado Ute tribes and is a long overdue effort to reconnect the tribes with their ancestral lands. And I would like to add that in addition to the bill, we've also published an Engage CPW page that will hopefully garner some input from the broader Native community on topics related to state park access as well. And I'd like to take a quick minute here to thank Matt Thorpe for his leadership on this effort. And I would add that if you have any questions, he's been a really great asset to the team, and he would be really well suited to help provide more information on this one if you have any questions. So in addition to this bill, CPW will be also running legislation this year related to wildlife trafficking. So specifically, the bill will allow CPW to increase inventory and research on the ecological impacts of wildlife trafficking. The bill will set forth penalties designed to more effectively deter wildlife trafficking, and it'll also help increase CPW's enforcement capacity so that we can better address illegal wildlife trade both into and out of the state of Colorado. This bill will make wildlife trafficking a predicate offense, meaning that there needs to be an underlying offense in order to be charged with wildlife trafficking. And really, the bill is trying to focus on native species of concern. So for instance, we've seen a lot of cases in recent years related to the trafficking of bear gallbladders, turtles, native reptiles, and a lot of other critters from the state of Colorado. We're really optimistic that the bill will help protect our native wildlife that are susceptible to being sold through these illegal markets, both in the US and internationally. This bill is also being sponsored by a really strong group of bipartisan sponsors. So we have Senator Bright in the House and Senator Bright in the Senate, and Representative Armagost and Representative Espinoza in the House. The bill was filed for introduction late last week, so it's not yet formally introduced, but we should probably see that happening in the next couple of days here. So in addition to our two CPW-initiated bills, like I mentioned, there are several others that we've been engaging on that I think will be of interest to this group. So starting with Senate Bill 3, this is the Semi-Automatic Firearm and Rapid Fire Device Bill. Senate Bill 3 would make it unlawful for an individual to purchase a specified semi-automatic firearm, and this would include several firearms that are commonly used for the purposes of hunting and sport shooting. This bill has officially passed out of the Senate on third reading as of yesterday with many, many amendments. But most notably, I would say there was one amendment that was adopted that exempts 40 of some of the most common hunting rifles, excuse me, that would have been initially prohibited under the original bill. And another amendment was adopted that CPW has been involved with, along with the governor's office and DNR, to create a firearm safety certification process that individuals could go through to become eligible for to be able to purchase a specified semi-automatic firearm covered in the bill within 5 years of course completion. The amendment allows those who are hunter education certified to take an abbreviated in-person firearm safety course, and all others would need to take an extended in-person firearm safety course in order to be eligible to purchase a semi-automatic firearm. Now that the bill has been amended, it is expected to pass through the House and eventually become law. Excuse me, one moment. Sorry about that. Next, we have Senate Bill 38. This requires that personal information of an individual who submits a wildlife damage claim to be kept confidential and is not disclosed pursuant to the Colorado Open Records Act, or CORA. CPW is officially in a support position on this bill, following the adoption of some amendments that clarified that important information related to claims and the use of non-lethal proactive measures be available to the public while still protecting personal information. This bill has passed the Senate and is awaiting hearing in House Ag, Water, and Natural Resources. Next, we have Senate Bill 49. This bill permanently reauthorizes the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Stamp Program, which is currently set to repeal effective July 1st, 2027. This is a major priority for CPW this year, as habitat stamp revenue provides core funding to our wildlife habitat program, which protects critical wildlife habitat and provides access for wildlife-related recreation. CPW is in support of this legislation, which has passed its first hearing in Senate Ag and Natural Resources and is awaiting a hearing in Appropriations Committee at this time. But we do anticipate smooth sailing for this one as it moves through the rest of the process. Next is Senate Bill 52, which classifies bison as big game wildlife, unless those bison are considered livestock. This bill was brought forward through the American Indian Affairs Interim Study Committee and is focused on bison, specifically from Utah's Book Cliff herds that have occasionally crossed the state line into Colorado over the last several years. CPW is in a support if amended position on this bill. I would say generally we support the concept of dual classification of bison. However, we do have some pretty major concerns with the bill as it's currently written. So mostly we do have some concerns with some changes that the bill is currently making to statutory definitions of both non-game wildlife and wildlife more generally. We're also looking to extend the effective date of this bill to give CPW some more time to develop a robust herd management plan for bison. And finally, we also suggest adding some language to the bill that would set license prices, fines, and penalties for the illegal harvesting and possession and poaching of bison that are classified as wildlife. So I would just add here that although CPW does not intend to permit hunting bison at this time, establishing these types of fees and statutes will help avoid the need for future legislation should we choose to permit bison hunting season in the future. This bill has officially been scheduled for its first hearing in Senate Ag and Natural Resources next week on the 27th. Just a couple more here. Next, House Bill 1023. This bill requires local governments to review applications for certain covered fencing projects that are located within the Sangre de Cristo land grant lands. CPW is officially in a support position on this one following the adoption of some amendments that excluded CPW-provided permanent game damage fencing from the requirements of the bill, and also to clarify that certain specifications related to wildlife-friendly fencing were accurate within the bill as well. This bill passed out of the House and is now awaiting its first hearing in Senate Ag and Natural Resources. And I do really want to take a quick second to thank Corey and the rest of the team in the Southwest region for your support on that bill and for testifying at the first hearing in the House. Next, House Bill 1133. This bill prohibits the sale of ammunition to adults 18 to 21 years old and would also establish some new requirements related to the distribution and sale of ammunition by retailers. CPW testified in an amend position at the bill's first hearing. And we're currently working with the bill's sponsors to develop some amendments that would likely be brought forward during second reading of the bill in the full House. CPW is hoping that our amendments will ensure that young adult hunters between the ages of 18 and 21 are able to purchase ammunition in the future, and also that CPW shooting ranges are able to continue selling ammunition to young adult shooters as well. Next, House Bill 1215. This bill redistributes lottery funding so that the Outdoor Equity Grant Program, or OEGP, and the Public School Capital Construction Assistance Fund receive additional funding. Most notably, the bill redistributes lottery spillover allocations in a way that provides more funding to OEGP, but in result, reduces the amount of lottery spillover that's going towards our Parks and Rec and our wildlife cash funds here at CPW. So this reduction in funding streams to our cash funds is definitely a concern for us. Although, however, we do support increasing funding to OEGP. I would note that CPW submitted a budget request this year that would increase our OEGP funding by $1.3 million annually from here on out. And so we're currently having some ongoing conversations with the bill's proponents to see if we can find some middle ground and still bolster OEGP while avoiding some of those cuts to our cash funds. And then the last one that I wanted to talk about on this call today, House Bill 1258. This one requires the Parks and Wildlife Commission to use the best available science to adopt rules that benefit wildlife, whole ecosystem health, and all Coloradans. The bill also softens some language in statute that mandates the commission to use hunting, trapping, and fishing as the primary methods of effecting wildlife harvests. So we are currently working through the language on this one now and do not yet have a formal position. However, I will say we do not anticipate this bill will make it out of its first hearing in Senate Ag and Natural Resources in its current state. So I apologize for rapid firing through all of that information, but I will stop there for now. Like I mentioned, there are several other bills that we're monitoring and engaging with, but I thought that this group of bills is probably the most relevant to this group. So I will stop there, and please don't hesitate to ask any questions.
Sarah, and these may not necessarily all be questions for you, so we'll spread some of these around. But Sarah, first, for folks who want to kind of stay up to date on the latest with these bills as they progress and advance, what's the best way for folks to kind of stay tuned, as they move from, committee to hearings and whatnot?
Yeah, we definitely track all of these sorts of bills internally. I would say the General Assembly website tries to keep things pretty up to date as soon as things are changing. So I would just try to write down bill numbers that are important to you and try to just constantly check the General Assembly website to see if the bill has been scheduled for another hearing. They also post any amendments or additional pertinent information there so you can stay up to date on all of these bills. And I guess I would just add, as always, if you ever have questions or issues navigating the General Assembly website, I'm happy to, provide any additional information as folks have questions pop up.
Thank you, Sarah. And yes, thank you, Mia, for dropping that link into the chat. Before we go to some of the questions that are in the other chats, wanted to open it up first to our representatives, Mia and Roger, to see if they had any additional questions related to this current legislative session.
I don't have any questions, John, but Sarah, thank you for that presentation.
Thank you, Roger. All right, and Matt Thorpe, I know you're with us. Maybe this is best for you, but if you or Corey would like to weigh in, if the bill protecting the information of recipients of game damage payments passes, Will we have any way to determine whether landowners are following CPW staff recommendations to reduce future conflicts and claims?
That's a good question. And it's easier to answer from CPW's perspective. Yes, we will know. Will that information be public? Not by landowner, because that's what is protected by this bill, is their personal information. But that's a good question. I will bring forward at least to that larger group on how we capture that data, because I know it's important not only to a lot of the public, but staff as well, and really as a whole, how we're doing as a state. So I'll definitely ask the question on how we can capture that and make sure it can be we can be as transparent as possible while also following the language within the bill on protecting that landowner information.
Yeah, Corey, and if I could just add on to that, that is one of the amendments that I was referring to specifically stated that, any pertinent information related to, requests of or use of any proactive non-lethal measures will still be available to the public. It's just simply, personal information, which includes names, phone numbers, businesses, addresses, all that sort of stuff will be the information that will be confidential and disclosed pursuant to the Open Records Act. So I want to assure folks that, important information regarding claims and non-lethal measures will still be very much available to the public. And we want to make sure that we're being transparent on that front.
Very good. Thanks, Corey and Sarah. It looks like that's all the questions I see currently in our Zoom meeting here, as well as on the YouTube stream. So with that, Sarah, I don't know if you want to hang out for a couple more minutes to see if any more questions follow up in the chat. But if people do have more questions later on after Sarah drops off, we can make sure we get those relayed to her and get folks an email response back if there's interest in that. But without any other current questions, I think we'll go ahead and transition into our aquatics update. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
All right, and I am going to share my screen real quick. As folks notice, I am not Jim White, who's on our agenda to give the aquatics update today. Jim is our senior aquatic biologist here in the Southwest region. He apologizes that he wasn't able to join us today. There was a meeting up in Glenwood Springs for some of the aquatic folks and weren't able to join, but I'm a fish guy at heart and happy to share some of Jim's updates for him. I tried to come up with a quick presentation, so bear with me as we go through it, but I'll start sharing my screen here and we'll power through it. All right, and I can't see it on my end, so maybe Jamin, you can help me tell if this is working or not.
We can see it, John. It's not in presentation mode yet.
Yeah, let me see if it switches here. How about now?
It's the same. We can still see the slides on the side.
No.
But not a big deal.
Okay. All right. Sorry, folks. Bear with me on that. Anyway, a few aquatic updates. We got a picture here, actually taken by the Colorado Sun from our Blue Mesa Lake Trout Harvest Incentive Tournament that is happening now through the end of April. So just encourage our anglers who are anxious to get out and want to do some ice fishing. The conditions at Blue Mesa this year seem like they've been really great. $10,000 worth of cash prizes up for grabs there, through the raffles or turning in the most fish. But yeah, just encourage folks to get out there for that. And Brandon Diamond, if you want to add anything to that as we go through here, or I introduce Julio, let me know. All right, did that go to my next slide, Jamin? I got 3 screens I'm trying to monitor here.
Yep, it did.
Okay. All right. So
yeah,
a couple things we wanted to introduce 2 new area aquatic biologists. Kay Jackson, first of all, started with us January 6th. here in the Durango area, backfilling Jim White's old position that Jim had for a long time. Cade was born and raised in Durango, went to Colorado State University. He had actually interned with us at the Area 15 Wildlife Office while he was in high school. He said he actually grew up, his favorite hobby was actually snorkeling in the Animas River and just checking out all the different creatures under there. So he's kind of had the aquatics itch his entire life. Eventually got on with us as a property technician, a seasonal employee, as well as a fisheries technician working under Jim White for a few summers before he went and got his master's at Kansas State. He just finished up his master's in December at Kansas State. So here you have a picture of Cade, and hopefully can see his quote. But we're excited to have Cade on and have his local knowledge and passion for all the Southwest Colorado fisheries on board here. We've also got Julio Del Piccolo, now in Area 16 out of Gunnison, replacing Dan Brow. Dan was in that position for nearly 30 years. He is now our statewide angler outreach manager. He's still based out of Gunnison, so a great asset for Julio to lean on there in the Gunnison Basin. He's already hard at work on that Blue Mesa lake trout tournament, as well as a few other projects out there. A little bit about Julio. He is also a graduate of Colorado State, got his master's from New Mexico State, and he said he's worked as a fisheries technician for state and federal agencies all across the West, from Alaska to New Mexico and everywhere in between, and also has a lot of local knowledge and some ties with CPW. So we're happy to have Julio on. I don't know if Brandon wants to add any more about Julio, who also started January 6th in Gunnison.
Good to go, John. Keep at it.
Thanks, Brandon. All right. So something that's not quite been released to the public yet, but wanted to give some of our angling community a little bit of a sneak peek at this. We had contracted out with another company back in 2022 to kind of quantify the economic contributions of fishing in Colorado. So you can see a little bit about this project. We did get results back that should be released to the public in the next month or two. Didn't want to get too much into it, but as you can see, we had more than 839,000 fishing licenses in Colorado distributed in 2022. They estimate about 686,000 anglers engaged in some sort of fishing activity that year, and that it contributed more than $2.5 billion in total economic output to the state's economy, supported more than 15,000 jobs, and more than $860 million in salaries and wages. So something the aquatics folks just wanted to share. Again, expect a little bit more information coming out from CPW with all the details from this study. I know there's some similar information on economic impacts of hunting and fishing have gone out in the recent SCORP report that's gone out. So more stuff for folks to look through. And again, the aquatic section will be announcing more results from that study and that project here in the next month or so. Did want to also just briefly talk about Ridgeway Reservoir. As folks know, sterile walleye were stocked into the reservoir for the first time last spring. It's a big project to kind of diversify the fishery there, while also CPW managing management goals of removing the illegally introduced smallmouth bass there, as well as providing a trophy brown trout fishery. So a few things happening there. Last October, Eric Gardunio, the area aquatic biologist there, and his staff did 2 weeks worth of night electrofishing. As part of that effort, they removed more than 2,400 of the smallmouth bass, which is going to have a meaningful impact on juvenile recruitment in the upcoming years and will help supplement tournament efforts. Because we found that catching the smallmouth bass, it can be challenging, and we have had the harvest incentive tournament happening there. That harvest incentive tournament has alternated to an every other year format. So I believe last year there was no tournament, which means we'll have a tournament this year, and we'll be supplementing some of that management goal of suppressing that population through electrofishing and removing those fish every other year as well. We did document some walleye recruitment. More than 70 walleye were captured during the electrofishing process, already ranging from 4 to 9 inches in length. Good to see some of those fish already growing after being stocked out as fingerling last spring. So we'll be curious to see how the walleye population does there. Again, sterile walleye. But we know with the introduction of the walleye, there's some concerns from the passionate trophy brown trout fishermen out at Ridgeway as well. So here you see one of our technicians holding up one of those trophy brown trout. They caught 44 of these trophy-sized fish during the electrofishing study. And along with that, we are engaging with anglers at Ridgeway Reservoir on kind of a unique project right now. The brown trout anglers are able to help us out with this novel study. They can take photos, which are analyzed by specific software that can identify a brown trout using each fish's unique spotting patterns. And through the study, we can kind of do a mark recapture model that estimates the population size and survival rates of these trophy brown trout and allow us to make meaningful management decisions to maintain that trophy brown trout population while also monitoring and creating this new walleye fishery. So some really innovative technology that they're using out there to keep track of some of these trophy brown trout and while also balancing it with other management goals for the reservoir. So anyway, I'm again not the senior fish biologist, just your public information officer. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of an update on some of the bigger things happening here in the Southwest region with aquatics right now, and just especially as our two new area biologists get up to speed in their positions. Imagine they'll be kind of making the rounds, local trout unlimited meetings and whatnot, and engaging more with the communities as they kind of learn what's important to each of the local area communities when it comes to fisheries management. So look out for Cade Jackson down here in the Durango area and Julio up there in Gunnison. All right. Well, I think I powered through it and I did it, and I don't see any questions directly related to this. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Jamin, who can give us the terrestrial section update for the region.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Mia and Roger, and for everybody who's tuning in. Appreciate it. I guess I will start by sharing my screen. And then we'll dive into some updates from terrestrial here. Let me know how this is going, John.
You're better than me. You got it.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks so much. As John mentioned, I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm the senior wildlife biologist here in the Southwest region. And I just wanted to give some updates on some of the different projects that we have going on across the region. Winter is a busy time period for us. We have a lot of different projects going on, a lot of radio collaring efforts, monitoring survival across different species, monitoring movement and migration patterns for a number of different species, as well as a lot of different helicopter surveys that we're conducting this time of year and other projects. So we'll just kind of dive into it here. But beginning in December, we conducted about, we being the area biologists as well as the local area staff, the DWMs, different field staff, conducted about 200 hours of helicopter surveys across Southwest Colorado, across the Southwest region. We do these for a number of different reasons, to monitor herd health and to get an idea of male-female ratios, female-young ratios, recruitment of young throughout the year. So we spend about 200 hours each winter conducting helicopter surveys of all of our big game herds across the region, everything from deer to elk to pronghorn to bighorn sheep. So biologists and district wildlife managers and other field staff have been busy with that, and the biologists are busy going through that data and putting all that data together and getting our population models ready that will produce the population estimates and the hunting license recommendations for this upcoming year. We also worked this winter on building a siteability model using radio-collared elk, primarily in the Gunnison Basin area for Southwest Colorado, as well as a couple other areas in the state. But for the Southwest region, using radio-collared elk in the Gunnison Basin to produce a siteability model, basically just estimates what percentage of the animals we actually observe on our helicopter surveys, and it allows us to have a check on our population models, or a way of verifying the estimates that go that are produced by our population models. So just kind of another way of estimating big game populations across the region, and we're excited to be building that model and utilizing it going forward. As I mentioned, are those slides advancing, John? Okay, great.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. As I mentioned, we also have a number of radio collaring studies ongoing across the region. These are largely annual studies, kind of long-term monitoring studies. We have what we call intensive deer monitoring areas in the Montrose area up on the Uncompahgre Plateau, as well as in the Gunnison Basin area, where we maintain a radio-collared sample of 80 radio-collared does and 60 radio-collared fawns annually to monitor their survival. And those collars at this point are all GPS collars, satellite collars. So those collars are collecting locations and providing us a lot of valuable information related to animal movements and migration patterns and habitat use throughout the year. So that's all really valuable information as well. And then, as I mentioned, we have an elk monitoring area now in the Gunnison Basin, where we're also maintaining a radio-collared sample of elk there in the Gunnison area of 60 radio-collared cows, 60 radio-collared calves and 80 radio-collared cows annually. And then as part of the siteability model development here this winter, we also radio-collared 15 bulls that we can use to build that siteability model from the helicopters. So kind of some exciting radio collaring projects going on there. We also radio collared sheep in a couple of different herds to monitor bighorn sheep movement and distribution relative to domestic livestock allotments occurring on federal lands. So several interesting projects going there. I also wanted to provide an update on our ongoing West Slope mountain lion density monitoring ongoing across the western slope. So with the adoption of the West Slope mountain lion management plan in 2020, we committed to radio collaring mountain lions and measuring mountain lion densities in various study areas across the West Slope. We're now in our second study area in the Southwest region. Our first study area was the Gunnison Basin, and then this winter we transitioned from Gunnison down to the Durango area, or more specifically, basically from Bayfield to Pagosa, both north and south of Highway 160. So now in our second study area in the Southwest region. The Northwest region also has, they're now in their third study area where they're measuring mountain lion densities and radio collaring lions and helping us to produce population estimates of lions across the state, which is obviously a big effort and not easy to estimate a big, secretive, somewhat rare animal across the landscape, rare relative to deer and elk or something like that, a herd animal. So we are currently in the process of attempting to radio collar 25 mountain lions across our new study area here in Southwest Colorado between Bayfield and Pagosa. And we will use those collars to produce a mark resite density estimate, where essentially beginning next winter, once we've radio collared our sample of 25 lions, we'll set up a camera grid across the study area of about 85 motion sensor cameras, game cameras across the study area. Those game cameras have a predator call associated with them that draws the mountain lion in at night. And we get those lions on camera, and based on the percentage of lions that we get on camera that are marked or that are radio collared, we can come up with some pretty some fairly accurate population density estimates across the area, and then we can extrapolate that statewide. So these are this slide just shows some of the study areas that where we've already monitored lion densities using radio collared lions across the state. You can see in the Northwest they've monitored densities in the Middle Park and now currently in the Book Cliffs area north of Grand Junction. We've also had a study site just west of Boulder, as well as the Upper Arkansas density monitoring area, which has been an ongoing monitoring area now for the last 9 years, where we've been monitoring lion densities in that area. And then, as I mentioned, we just this last winter have moved down here to Southwest Colorado between Bayfield and Pagosa. So I would say kind of the take-home message from this slide is that our lion densities in all of these study areas appear to be good. They're essentially at least as good as what we were estimating previously, sometimes even a little bit higher. So lion densities and populations across the state appear to be high and appear to be doing quite well. And based on what we're seeing so far, I would expect similar results here in the Durango area or in the southwest part of the state. So we are, as I mentioned, currently attempting to get up to a radio collared sample of 25 lions. This is our current study area. You can see Bayfield there on the west, Pagosa Springs there on the east, and then Highway 160 kind of running through the center of the study area. I should mention this is a cooperative study with the Southern Ute Tribe, and it's been really fun to work with them and their biologists and as well as their houndsmen to try to radio collar lions for this project. And they've been a huge help and really enjoy working with them. But we do currently, so far we've been able to radio collar 9 lions this winter. So our sample is up to a radio collared sample of 9. Adult lions across the study area so far, and then we'll attempt to get up close to 20 to 25 here by the end of the winter and heading into the camera grid next year. This is the same study area overlaid with our habitat model. That it's a predictive model that predicts lion densities across the state. So basically we're using these lion density estimates as a test to this habitat model, or this resource selection function model is what we call it, that basically uses habitat types and prey densities to estimate lion densities across the state. So the areas that are highlighted in yellow or red, those are areas that are predicted to have high lion densities. This is a winter habitat model, so this would be while deer and elk populations are on winter range, kind of down lower elevations. And you can see the areas highlighted in yellow and red where we would predict to have high lion densities. And then the areas in blue or green are the areas where we would predict to have lower lion densities. And this is the model that we're currently attempting to test with the Mark Rees site radio collar population estimates. So as I mentioned, we so far have 9 lions collared across the study area. Hopefully we'll get up to 20 or 25 by the end of the winter, or maybe into early summer. We have a couple different ways of collaring lions. We can either go out after a fresh snowstorm and find tracks and trail lions with hounds, get them up a tree, and then we're able to tranquilize them, lower them out of the tree, and radio collar them and release them that way. Or we can bait them into live traps, basically cage traps or box traps, using road-killed deer, and bait them in and trap them that way, and then sedate them and radio color them using that method. So that's a little bit of an update on our lion study. I'd be happy to answer any questions related to that if there are any. And then I just kind of wanted to end with just a brief update on the wolf reintroductions, as well as potential future Wolverine reintroductions. I won't spend a lot of time on wolves because it's obviously been well covered in the press and a lot of information out there already. But I think as probably everybody listening in to this call knows, we did reintroduce an additional 15 wolves from British Columbia last month, in addition to the wolves that were brought in from Oregon the year before, last year. And those wolves are currently on the landscape and doing well. We don't have currently any wolves in the Southwest region. We did have one that traveled down and was briefly in the Southwest region for a few days, and then basically turned around and went back to the north. So no wolves that we currently know of in the Southwest region, although certainly that could change anytime. And then folks may also start hearing discussion of potential Wolverine reintroductions over the next couple of years. We are in the process of putting together a Wolverine reintroduction plan, which is an interesting process and an interesting thing to put together because it's actually never been done before. Nobody's ever attempted to reintroduce Wolverines. So if we are able to do so, we would be the first ones to attempt that. But we're currently in the process of developing a plan. Colorado does have a lot of really good Wolverine habitat. I think it's estimated that Colorado has something like 40% of the available Wolverine habitat in the lower 48 states. So a lot of available habitat, a lot of good Wolverine habitat, and I think it's likely that we'll make some moves toward reintroducing Wolverines here within the next couple of years. So more to come on that, but just wanted to give folks a heads up on that. You may start hearing information on that. And with that, I think that's about all I have, but happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. So thank you all.
Yeah, we'll start with me and Roger. If you had anything for Jamin, we do have a few questions that have come in on the YouTube channel that I can relay, but I want to start with Mia and Roger if they have anything first.
Thank you for the reports, Jamin. They're very helpful. I don't have any questions right now.
Thanks, Mia.
I don't have anything currently either. Very informative. Jamin, thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Jamin, we got a question from the Zoom first from Adrian. I'm just asking what's being done to help the struggling elk herds here in the Southwest.
Good question. We have seen, I guess, so I'll just back up about 20 years or maybe 25 years now at this point. So starting in the early 2000s, we began to see a decline in elk calf recruitment in a lot of our Southwest elk herds. So, beginning now close to 25 years ago, now we started to see a lot of our December calf ratios, which are basically our indication of calf recruitment throughout the year. Our December calf ratios began to decline from about 40 or 50 calves per 100 cows down into the 20s and 30s. I think a couple of years we even had calf ratios in some of our herds that were in the teens. So pretty substantial, I would say a slow but steady and substantial over time decline in calf recruitment in a lot of the Southwest elk herds. That also corresponds very closely with extended drought that we've been in during that time period. I think drought plays a huge role in calf recruitment and calf survival. It makes them more susceptible to predation because they're more visible, especially during the first few weeks of their life. If there's not as much moisture and precipitation, we tend to get less ground cover, less hiding cover for them. They become more visible, and predation rates tend to go up. So it did correspond pretty heavily with precipitation rates and extended drought. It's also corresponded with pretty substantial increases in summer recreation pressure across the landscape. So I think across most of Southwest Colorado. We've seen large increases in trail development and just ongoing recreation pressure, especially during the calving season, so during the summer season, on public lands in particular. And then certainly predators and other factors could be involved as well. But I think there's a number of factors related to that. We do have ongoing research in several of our elk herds across Western Colorado, not just here in the Southwest, but in the Northwest as well, evaluating elk calf survival and elk calf recruitment and causes of mortality. So I would say that there's no easy fix. I think it's a really complex thing when you're talking about drought and precipitation and recreation pressure and fracturing of habitats, fracturing of landscapes, increased human development, everything that's probably impacting this. So that's something we're concerned about and something that we're researching. And I don't know that there's a lot of easy fixes, but we'd love to see elk calf recruitment improve in the future.
Jamin,
John,
along that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Corey.
I can jump in a little bit real quick because one thing that we have done over the past few years is definitely adjust our licenses that we have in the Southwest. I think Jamin could probably touch on that a little bit because I think we have seen an uptick in that calf survival. Also along, different lines, I guess, a little higher level, we've worked with ECMC, our Energy Commission. I know through our last rulemaking that we had with them, they've been able to go in and add what I would call it's not a tax, but a fee that producers pay in that is it goes into each region's bucket, I guess, to protect and enhance habitat within those areas. So we're starting to see some funding hit that, and then also I don't know if Sarah's still on, but I know there was some legislation that passed that will be much larger that helps out both CPW and CDOT, but that will provide a large amount of funding to do the same. And then we're also backfilling some of the biologists that we lost during the merger when we had to, as part of that merger, we had to reduce by 50 FTEs. So hopefully we'll start to see some of that backfill and be able to get more folks out there to do some of this work. So hopefully that helps.
Yep, those are all good points, Corey. And I guess just as you were speaking there, one other thing popped into my mind, which is just all the habitat work that we've done across the region and across the state. CPW, along with all of our different partners, federal partners, conservation organizations, we put a lot of money and time and effort towards habitat improvement projects and trying to protect and conserve as much habitat as possible. So we're certainly doing, I think, as much as we can, and hopefully starting to see some benefit to that. As Corey mentioned, we have seen a slight uptick in calf recruitment the last few years, so maybe we're starting to head back the right direction.
Jamin, I know you mentioned some of the research and mentioned one of the impacts on wildlife herds, being recreation. We had a question on the YouTube channel. Has CPW done or will you do any studies on the effects of the amount of 24/7, 365 outdoor recreation and how that affects wildlife, specifically the ungulate populations and that cow-calf recruitment and elk, specifically to South Central Colorado and Southwest Colorado? I know you mentioned some of the calf monitoring and the research that goes on with that. Does any of that the results we're getting include what we may see from impacts of recreation?
It does. So it's another good question. We do have two of our ungulate researchers, Nathaniel Rail, and it was Nathaniel Rail and Eric Bergman. Eric has now moved into a different position, but it'll be Eric's backfill. Anyway, we do have two of our ungulate researchers who are specifically looking at impacts of recreation pressure on elk distribution and survival and calf recruitment. So still a little too early to give a lot of results related to that. It's all still fairly preliminary, but we do have an ongoing research project evaluating recreation pressure and potential impacts. And that's certainly one of the factors that's impacting elk and other wildlife across the landscape.
And we had a follow up from Adrian to his last question. Besides the research, will tags be reduced and the option of removing OTC pressure be evaluated on struggling elk herds here in the Southwest?
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. As Corey mentioned, we have adjusted elk licenses fairly substantially, especially in Southwest Colorado. We switched from over the counter to limited for a lot of our for the archery season for a lot of our elk herds here in the Durango area and elsewhere, places like units 80 and 81 in the San Luis Valley, southern San Luis Valley, as well as the Grand Mesa a couple of years ago. So we have switched from an unlimited to a limited licensing model, especially during the archery seasons for a number of our herds. We've also drastically cut back cow licenses, antlerless elk licenses in a number of our herds. So we're currently harvesting substantially fewer cows in most of our herds than we were 15, 20, 25 years ago. So we certainly have adjusted license numbers and continue to do so, I would say. And then I think that's probably going to come up in later in this call when we begin to talk about some of the big game season structure changes as well, and the switch from unlimited to limited archery licenses for non-residents across the state. So certainly something that we're adjusting on an annual basis related to license management.
And Jamin, just one more for you. I know this is a question you and I get quite a bit, but in terms of the classification flights for population counting of our herds, Travis on YouTube asked, "My confusion is why the need for pushing animals with the rotary wing when there are less invasive ways to get a herd count in low-calorie winter times."
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, the reason we use helicopters is because it's currently the most efficient method that we have. We're certainly exploring potential future options related to things like drone technology, potential infrared technology from a fixed wing aircraft. It's important that we are able to get a representative sample of animals across the landscape so that we can get accurate buck-doe ratios, fawn-doe ratios, bull-cow, cow-calf ratios. So it's really necessary that we get a representative sample across the landscape. And currently, helicopters are our most efficient way or method of doing so across a mix of public and private landscapes and different elevations and so on and so forth. I do think that in the future, there's a lot of potential to transition more towards drone technology or infrared technology, camera technology. But currently, helicopters are our best method, and it certainly is a short disturbance on them, but it's very, very quick. Generally, we tend to go in, do the survey, classify the animals, and then we're on our way within a matter of just a few minutes. So it certainly does provide them some disturbance, but generally, just for a few minutes time period. So hopefully nothing substantial.
All right, I think that's it for right now for Jamin. I know we have another question in the YouTube channel, but I think it might be more appropriate after we invite our next guest on. So without further ado, we have Danielle Eisenhart here from our licensing department. And Danielle is going to talk to us about proposed draw changes that are currently in front of the commission that would go into place in 2028 if approved. So Danielle, thank you so much for joining us in the Southwest region tonight.
Thanks, John. Do you want me to present or do you have my?
Yeah, if you have it in front of you, you can go ahead.
You may have to
I'll make you a
enable.
co-host here. There you go.
All right. See if I can be efficient like Jamin and get it going. All right. Can you guys see this slide?
You're good. Thanks, Danielle.
All right. Thank you again. My name is Danielle Eisenhart. I am the License, Reservation, and Customer Operations Section Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I was also one of the staff administrators for the straw working group process. So this process kicked off back in October of 2023, and it's in the process of concluding right now. The commission did approve all the policy changes that I'll discuss tonight at our January commission meeting. And then at our March meeting, you'll see this topic again on the agenda as we finalize all the regulations that need to be put in place to make those policy changes effective. As John mentioned, one of the big things that I want to stress throughout this presentation is that even though these changes are being adopted and approved, they're not going to be implemented until our 2028 draws. So I know you're going to talk about some other big game season structure things tonight as well, which are going to be implemented this year, but all these draw working group changes are coming in 2028. All right, so we'll first start by talking about the changes for deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, and turkey. So the first things we're going to cover are changes to our primary draw and the way that that draw is run. So we call that the primary draw methods. So how this is going to work is we're going to transition from our current preference point model to this new split draw model. So how a split draw model will work is the commission will approve quotas for hunt codes in May, and we take those quota and we divide the quota in half, and half of the quota will be issued using our current model, our preference point model, and the other half of the quota will be administered through what we call a bonus point drawing. So it still accounts for a person's preference point levels, but there is a random component. So for example, if I hold 4 preference points for that species, I get 5 names in the hat. So my number of preference points plus 1. And the reason for the plus 1 is, again, for our first time applicants who may not have any preference points, that gives them 1 name in the hat. So we'll run the preference draw first choice first, and then remove those applicants from the bonus draw, and then run first choice in the bonus draw next, and go choice by choice through the draw till all the quota is allocated. The other big change for these species is to our residency allocation. So currently we have most of our hunt codes that are 75% resident and 25% non-resident. But we also have some high demand hunt codes that are 80% resident and 20% non-resident. In 2028, that will change to be 75-25 across the board for all hunt codes. So there's no longer going to be that differentiation between high demand, low demand, using that rolling 3-year average with preference points. The other big change, though, that will benefit residents is that those allocation rules will be applicable to first and second choice. Currently, they only apply to the first choice hunt codes. So with both of these changes, it may seem like residents are going to get less licenses, but in reality, with going to first and second choice, many more residents will be drawing under this new model. Also want to specify that this is just for the primary draw. No changes are being proposed to how we run our secondary draw. The other thing that's pretty new is a preference point fee for deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, and turkey, which is being proposed at $15 for residents and $30 for non-residents. And just like our current preference point fee for moose, sheep, and goat, there would be the option to opt in or out of paying that fee. However, if you opt out, you will not gain a point for that year. The way this preference point fee kind of came about throughout these discussions is in order to make those residency allocation changes that I discussed on the last slide, that will cost the agency a lot of revenue because of the difference between a resident and a non-resident license price. And so this was seen as a way by the commission to not lose that revenue and at least cover the costs that the agency might lose from extending those allocation rules. Preference points would still only be gained and used on the first choice and in the primary draw. No preference points in the secondary draw still. And the other kind of big change is our preference point only hunt codes that you all may be used to will be going away. You can still apply just for a preference point if you want, but you will get kind of a question as you're applying whether you want to apply just for a point or whether you want to actually enter a hunt code for a license. If you're unsuccessful for a first choice, you would still get that preference point in that scenario as well. It's just a little bit of a change on not using a preference point only hunt code, but just clarifying that you just want to purchase a point in the draw. So now we'll transition to talking about Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and moose. So for this draw, the draw working group discussed whether that split draw model would work for these species as well. And the consensus was that it really wouldn't, because the quota for these species is so low and the demand is so much higher that really they felt like doing a 100% bonus draw model made the most sense for these species. So this 100% bonus draw would replace our current weighted draw model. I do want to specify that the draw odds are statistically the same or similar between these two draw methods. And I think most of our customers actually think that our weighted draw works this way. So again, with a bonus draw model, the number of points that I hold for that species would be my number of chances in the drawing plus 1. But that would be 100% bonus draw model for these species. Allocation would be staying the same as we have currently. So a 90% resident, 10% non-resident allocation. And just like we have today, there would be residency specific quota for these species. So kind of a hard cap model. So since we're no longer using a weighted draw, we would be transitioning preference points to just normal points. So in this table, we give a few examples of what that would look like. So if someone had 3 regular preference points and 22 weighted points, we would add those together to get 25 as their new point value. But then again, as far as your names in the hat or your chances, you would get 26 because you add 1. The $50 and $100 preference point fee would remain in place for these species as well. So there was a lot of discussion about kind of barriers to entry because demand is so high for these species. So one idea was instituting actual waiting periods before someone could draw a license, especially for a male or either sex license. So what was approved was a 3-year waiting period that a customer would have to apply and purchase points before they would be eligible to draw a male or either sex license. There would be no point threshold required for a female license for these species. The other barrier to entry that was discussed is a once-in-a-lifetime harvest. So this would be extending it to a once-in-a-lifetime upon harvest. Sweetheart, I'm in a meeting. Okay. Extending this, we currently have for moose and desert sheep, and extending it to mountain goats and Rocky Mountain bighorns. The exceptions to this would be for auction and raffle licenses, bighorn sheep access program licenses, or control or special management licenses. Those would be exempt. The draw working group was clear that this really wouldn't improve draw odds, but it was viewed more of a fairness issue. That if you are lucky to draw one of these licenses, would it be fair to draw another one? The other thing I want to be clear about is this is not going back into the future. This is just starting in 2028. Anyone that draws one of these licenses would no longer be eligible to draw another male or either sex, but we would not be going back into someone who's previously harvested one of these species. There would also be a 5-year waiting period after you harvest a male or either sex or an animal on an either sex license before you could apply again for points or a female license. And then the other change for consistency and simplicity was on group applications. There was not consistency between all 4 of these species. And so instead, the draw working group recommended doing a consistent reg for all of these. So a 2 applicant maximum. Residents and non-residents couldn't apply together. They would have to have the same residency, and we would limit it to 2 in the group. So this would make it consistent for moose and desert sheep. All right, moving on to desert bighorn sheep and the primary draw. So desert bighorn sheep is staying status quo. So we actually don't have preference points for this species. We just do a random draw. So everybody has an equal chance of drawing a desert bighorn sheep. And we would keep that the same. And then there was also a recommendation from the group that if we added any new limited species in the future, we would also use a random draw method for that species as well. So even though we kind of have different rules for the species, there are some similarities with Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and moose. We will have the same group application restrictions, the same allocation rules of 90-10, and the same once in a lifetime harvest. Autumn, you need to get out of here. You can't be quiet. Apologies for kids in the room. All right, let's move on to the reissue process. So for the reissue process, we talked about this idea of an auto reissue, which basically means that licenses that are surrendered or turned into us that someone draws that they no longer want, they'd be automatically reissued to the applicant who applied for them in the draw that would be next up to draw it. This would be based on our next up report, so it would take into account residency, and it would also only apply to applicants that opted in to accept auto reissues by that hunt code while they're applying. And they could also change this preference as long as they have not been issued the license. So if they decide they no longer want it, they can go into their account and opt out after that point. So with an auto reissue, if they are next up and they've opted in, that license would be automatically issued to them and their credit card would be charged. And if it was a first choice license in the primary draw, they would also lose their preference points. And we would use this model up to 2 weeks before the start of the season. So I think I touched on this before. If it was a first choice hunt code during the primary draw, all preference points for that species would also become void. If it was a hunt code for second, third, or fourth choice or in the secondary draw, then no points would be used. So this auto reissue process will be used all the way up until 2 weeks before the start of the season. If we're with So once we get to this 2 weeks or less prior to the start of the season, we would kind of transition to what our current model is for reissues. So for deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, and turkey licenses, those would be added to our weekly preview list and then released on Wednesdays. And they would be treated just like leftover licenses like we do today, and they would not require the use of preference points. For Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep, desert bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and moose, again, turned in 2 weeks or less prior to the start of the season, we would manually reissue those licenses like we do now, where we actually physically call and email the next up applicants and ask them if they want to accept it. So it would not be done automatically. If they accept one of those licenses, it would use preference points. So again, the similar method that we're using currently for these species. And if the next 5 in line don't accept it, or we don't have any more applicants that were in the draw for that license, they could be put on the leftover list as well. Again, if the next 5 refuse the license. It's rare that this happens, but occasionally it does. And then the last big change I wanted to cover was fail to pays. So this is a situation where if a customer draws a license, but their credit card that we have on file is declined when we try to process it, they have a period of time to go in and make that payment to keep the license. But currently, if they don't pay by that payment deadline, we take the license back and all the points that were used to draw that license are forfeited. Under the new fail to pay policy, which will be implemented in the 2025 draws, this is the one exception that will be implemented this year, we'll be able to restore customer preference points. So they'll still lose the license if they don't pay for it by the payment deadline, but we will restore the points to the pre-draw level. In the new system, starting in 2028, those licenses that are returned again will be auto reissued. That piece, the auto reissue piece, will have to wait until the 2028 draws. That was my last slide. Happy to take any questions.
All right. Yeah, don't have any questions so far in the chat, but while people may be getting those in, we'll turn over to me or Roger to see if they have any questions or want to expand on anything there.
Again, thank you, Danielle, for the report. I don't have any questions, and I also wanted to say thank you for being willing to work late and have your family interrupting. I have some interrupting as well, so thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks for the patience with the interruption. I appreciate it.
No questions for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger.
Okay, we've got oh, Adrian he says, I second that. Thanks for being a mom. All right. Yeah, Danielle, I don't think I see any other questions in the YouTube or here in the Zoom. I don't know if you want to stay with us over this next topic or whatnot or listen in, but I know we've got some questions related to non-resident archery draw rules with some changes going into effect with the big game season structure, whatnot. I believe Jamin has prepared something to kind of get us kickstarted on that topic for tonight.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, John. Let me share my screen again.
Real quick, Jamin, I think we did get a question in. It might be from Brandon, but he asked Danielle, quick confirmation, will qualifying licenses still be required?
Yeah, thanks, Brandon, for the question. Yes, nothing has changed with the qualifying license requirements. That will still be required to enter the primary or secondary draws moving into the future.
Thank you. Okay, back to you, Jamin.
Okay, thanks, John, and thanks, Danielle, for your presentation. That should be a good segue into this one. Is that working, John?
Looks good. Thanks, Jamin.
Okay, great. Yeah, we just wanted to give a brief update on the 2025 through 2029 big game season structure. A lot of it plays off of the draw working group changes that Danielle just presented and discussed. We've been getting a lot of questions related to the upcoming big game season structure and some of the changes occurring with that. We just wanted to address some of that, specifically the change from over-the-counter unlimited archery elk licenses for non-residents to entirely limited archery elk licenses statewide for non-residents. So this past summer, after a lengthy public and internal process, CPW Commission, Parks and Wildlife Commission, adopted the 2025 through 2029 big game season structure that will guide season structure for the next 5-year process beginning or 5-year period beginning this upcoming fall. And Brandon or Corey, Rachel, Danielle, anybody, feel free to chime in at any point in time here. But anyway, there are a number of changes coming into effect here this year. It would be great for hunters to check out the what's new section of the big game brochure that actually just came out. Should be in your mailboxes or at your local offices within the last few days. So we'd encourage folks to check out the what's new for 2025. That explains some of the changes related to the season structure and some of the need to know things. So a couple of the different changes. One is that we've implemented first rifle deer licenses in some units across the state. These are largely just to spread out hunting licenses and spread out hunting pressure across more seasons. So we don't expect an actual increase in license numbers or an increase in harvest. We're just mostly trying to spread out hunting pressure or direct it into certain areas at certain times of the year. So that's largely the reason for those changes. And then certainly a lot of the questions we're getting are related to the change that the commission adopted to fully limit non-resident archery elk licenses statewide. So non-residents will no longer be able to purchase, just show up in the state and purchase over-the-counter archery elk licenses beginning this year. So all of those previously unlimited OTC non-resident licenses have had to be converted into hunt codes. You can find those on page 43 of the big game brochure. So check those out if you're interested. And then we're getting a lot of questions related to how will those license numbers be determined. And the answer to that is essentially for this first year, we intend to set non-resident license numbers, non-resident archery license numbers, somewhere near the number of total non-resident OTC archery license numbers that were sold in 2024. So statewide, it will be a similar number to what we sold in 2024, but it will now be explicit to a specific GMU or a specific DAU, and those will be based on the number of hunters that reported hunting in a specific unit based on responses from the big game harvest survey that goes out following the hunting seasons every year. So new limited archery elk hunt codes have been created for all GMUs for non-residents across the state. Non-residents can no longer purchase OTC archery elk licenses for GMUs west of I-25 and GMU 140. So they will now need to apply through the draw or potentially pick up a leftover license if there are leftover licenses available. OTC archery elk licenses will remain available for resident hunters in OTC units. So I'll talk a little bit about this, but and this came up earlier, but a number of our DAUs and GMUs, especially in the Southwest region, have within the last 5 years switched from OTC to limited. So there won't be a change to those units, but for areas that are still OTC for elk archery, they will remain so for residents only. And then again, proposed quotas for non-residents will be determined based on license numbers from this last year, licenses that were sold this last year, and participation for each herd. Initially, that probably doesn't sound like we're decreasing non-resident licenses much at all. But if you look at some of the long-term trends over the last few years, this is OTC archery elk license sales, both for residents and non-residents over about the last 12 or 13-year period. And you can see we spiked with non-resident licenses in 2021. That was our high point for non-resident license sales for archery elk, was in 2021, and we've seen a decline every year since then. So setting licenses at the 2024 number here for this first initial year actually is a decline in license numbers compared to where we were several years ago. So I think that's an important factor to keep in mind. You can see there the change. Most of these units here are in the Southwest region. Beginning in 2020, we began to limit a number of our archery elk GMUs and DAUs. In 2020, we limited 3 big DAUs in the Durango area. In 2022, we limited, and this would be limitations for both residents and non-residents. We limited E32, which is the South San Luis Valley, GMUs 80 and 81. And then in 2023, we limited E14, which is the Grand Mesa. This graph is both limited and unlimited archery elk license sales across the state. So total license sales for archery across the state, and you can see that as we've gone limited in certain DAUs and GMUs across the state over the last few years, that those OTC unlimited numbers have declined accordingly, and then we've seen a decline in the total number of licenses statewide again since 2021. So we have began to address hunter crowding issues and non-resident license sales somewhat over the last few years. I expect that we will continue to do so within the next few years or over the next few years. So I expect some of those trends to continue, but that's kind of where we are currently, and I'll just, I guess, leave it at that. And then if anybody else would like to jump in and add anything, feel free, or we can answer questions.
I can jump in real quick. Just to touch on, I guess, going back to that number that we're probably going to run with, which is about 13,000 licenses. Often we get the question, you know, are you making that choice based on funding? And to be honest, the answer is yes and no. It impacts the decision, of course, but it's not the sole decision. We still do have to run the agency. This one's one that, to be honest, none of us within the agency can understand the impact until we see it for a year. This is something we did somewhat like this in the Southwest, that we started at status quo just so we knew what even just the change itself would make statewide. So going into this and automatically going limited, we anticipate that we'll automatically lose some non-resident participation. So this at least allows us to gauge that from somewhat of a safe place, and then over time be able to ratchet down in certain areas, or if we see a need for more harvest than others, or there's less participation, we can add more licenses in other units. So I just wanted to address that a little bit. And check my notes, just double check. Yeah, I think that's it. And if you look at the total numbers, you really have to look at two different pots of licenses. Total allocation non-resident archery is typically, at least it was last year, about 21,000. So in other words, you have one group of licenses that have always been, or they are limited, and there's a number attached to those. And then you take the group that was OTC, and that represents the 13,000. And when you combine those two, it's the 21,000 total statewide that could go to non-residents, if that helps out.
Very good. Thanks, Corey. Just a few, I think we've kind of touched on these a little bit, but in the YouTube, I want to just acknowledge some of the questions that are coming in there. One question was, how do you recoup the revenue from non-resident licenses that were sold? Does this mean you will increase resident prices to make up the difference, with the comment that they would hate to see that happen?
Danielle would have to help me, but I think one way that the commission is attempting to address that is with preference point fees as well. I don't think that's had that has not had final vote, I believe. Danielle, is that correct? Is that still on the agenda? Can you confirm that?
Yeah, so all the regs for those draw working group changes will be finalized at the March commission meeting. So there'll be another opportunity to discuss the preference point fee amount. And then I don't think the quotas for these hunt codes will be approved till May. So there's some changes going to happen in the March meeting, and then other changes as far as quotas for limited licenses will be in May.
And then just clarifying for Redemption Hunting, who asked in the YouTube, so you are creating non-resident limited licenses to match the number of OTC non-resident licenses sold in 2024.
that was for non-resident archery, John? Sorry, just clear.
Yes.
Yes, so in 2024, there was 13,000 non-resident archers, which basically is a 10% drop. If you look at the whole picture. So yes, we set that number to last year's numbers of 13,000 or thereabout.
And Andrew on YouTube asks, at what point do the manual reissues start? Before the secondary draw, so then only leftover licenses would be available during the secondary draw?
Happy to take that question. So the auto reissues will kick in the very first time after the primary draw. So after the primary draw, we have a short time frame when people can actually surrender a license that they drew if they no longer want it. We also have the licenses I mentioned that are not paid for by the payment deadline. So both of those groups of licenses after the primary draw will go through this auto reissue process before any of those licenses will kick to our secondary draw. And then a similar process will happen after the secondary draw. So if after that there's licenses that get surrendered after the secondary draw or not paid for after the secondary draw, we'll go through another reissue process. The only thing I'll mention there is before we would go to someone who applied in the secondary draw, if there was somebody who applied for that same hunt code in the primary draw, we would start with the primary draw list before we would go to the secondary draw list. So hopefully that answers the question. If there's still follow-up, please ask.
Yeah, a few more clarifying questions have come in. I guess we'll go back to the preference point fee one first. At the last commission meeting, the commissioner supposedly approved the preference point fee. Are you saying this could be rescinded? That question in from Redemption Hunting.
Anything is possible. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the commission. The regs, the reg part of it has not been finalized. So the commission does have the purview to change anything or make modifications to the policies that they approved in January.
And then there was a follow-up question as well. So preference point fees for non-residents then, or are residents having to pay fees now?
Again, starting in 2028 for deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, and turkey. It would be starting in 2028. So $15 for residents, $30 for non-residents. So both residents and non-residents would have to pay a fee, but the price is cheaper for residents for the preference point. And then our $50 and $100 sheep and goat and moose preference point fee that we currently have will continue to be in place.
Thank you for that. And I'll just relay a comment from Andrew on the YouTube stream. He said, thank you. This is very good to know as it will change the secondary draw a lot and youth opportunity. Hopefully this clarification can be part of the education process before 2028. We do have another question that came in from Adrian here on Zoom. Why are we worried about a revenue loss from non-residents when those tags are the same number as 2024 and they'll bleed over to the leftover pool and be eventually picked up there? With the comment, there should be zero revenue loss. Additionally, you'll gain from qualifying licenses plus preference points. And Adrian asks, what is he missing? Or what are they missing?
You're right if you look at 1 year. And our whole goal is to, again, understand what demand's going to be. Every year, every license is not actually issued. There's some that stay on the leftover list the entire round. Those will be on there just so we can understand preference of the hunter, whether that's a lot go in the draw and then quite a few go onto the leftover and they're picked up there. But still, that allows us to at least gauge, one, how much participation on the front end that we potentially would lose. And you're completely correct. With us having that full quota there that can go over to the leftover in the first year, we could see all of those go, not all of those go, but it still kind of gives us a gauge and time to understand really the definition of what hunter crowding is and what satisfaction is of our non-resident hunters, and then we'll address that over time.
Another question coming in from Andrew on YouTube. If point creep was one of the main issues the draw working group was set to solve, how would a hybrid preference and bonus draw help this? If anything, this would increase point creep further.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think our working group, we had a kind of a mission statement, and I don't think our specific goal was to try to eliminate point creep, but we were trying to ensure that all hunters, even new and novice hunters and youth, would have the opportunity in their lifetime, especially to draw some of these really high demand licenses that with our current model and point creep, there'd never be a chance for them to draw. So while this doesn't solve point creep, it does give a small opportunity with the bonus draw half of the split for everyone to be able to draw these licenses in their lifetime. So no, it doesn't solve point creep, but it does provide the opportunity.
We've got a question here in the Zoom. Will preference point fees only be applied for archery applications or all applications if loss to archery participation is the concern?
So again, these new preference point fees for deer, elk, bear, pronghorn, and turkey will not be in place till 2028, and they'll be for all hunt codes and all seasons, so not just the archery season. I know it's confusing to folks when we have big game season structure things going on at the same time we're having draw working group discussions, but really the two are separate. The archery change was to address overcrowding concerns that we were hearing from members of the public, whereas the draw working group changes were to address simplifying the draws, making them more easy to understand, and yes, addressing like preference point issues. So two completely different achievements that they were trying to get at end games. So the two are kind of different between the archery license issue and the preference point fee issue. So hopefully that clears some things up for folks.
And one more question from D Mays over on the YouTube side of this. Adding preference point fees to residents for deer, elk, bear, and pronghorn will only push hunters away and or increase point creep. How do you fix that?
So I think like I said, the main purpose of the fee was to try to cover the costs from the allocation changes. But playing devil's advocate, if we are also trying to address preference point creep issues, the preference point fee, especially if people either decide to opt out or not apply for a preference point, will help address preference point creep issues because we'll have less people that every year are gaining a point for every species. So while that was not really the intention that the commission mentioned for putting those in place, I do think it will help address preference point creep as well as a secondary kind of benefit.
And Danielle, just one more comment on the YouTube side from Andrew. Andrew says, Danielle, thank you for all of your time and effort on these initiatives. Andrew's watched every commission and draw video and says that you've been instrumental in helping the commission understand this better. We'll just echo that for your time and joining us tonight to assist with these questions. I think it's a huge benefit for folks who maybe don't get an opportunity to tune into all the commission meetings to be able to ask some of these questions and get a better understanding. So just really want to thank you for joining us tonight as well.
Thank you. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it. And I'm very passionate about the draws, as you all could probably tell. Thank you again for having me.
Yeah, Danielle, me too. As someone who's sat in your seat, I can very much appreciate the work that you do. So thank you.
Thanks, Corey.
All right. With that, everything's moving right on schedule tonight, which I would love to see. Wanted to open it up for these last few minutes that we have tonight with everybody, just to take any kind of roundtable questions me or Roger might have while we're together one more time in this setting, as we kind of keep our mind to the future, I guess, after March 1st in the upcoming statewide roundtable at how we may shape these regional style meetings in the future. But just wanted to open the floor to Mia and Roger if they have any more questions for staff or any other comments they'd like to share tonight.
Yeah, thank you, John. I don't have any more questions, but I did want to make a comment to people watching is that the regulation guides are out and available. And as a hunter ed instructor, I have to read these every year before I start teaching because we mentioned in there, like, we need to look at what's new for 2025. And so go in there and read that, and it'll answer a lot of questions. And then I also would go back and look at the chapters in the replay of the YouTube. So, because there's a lot of information and you can just reread that and answer questions to yourself there. And then I really, really highly encourage you to find a positive way to share the information with other hunters who aren't tuned in here, because that's what we see a lot in the forums online are people ranting and raving. And since you have tuned in, hopefully you can kind of explain what you've heard. And then additionally, we just mentioned commission meetings and that people are tuning into those. That's something else that it takes time to do, but if you have a way to tune into those or listen to replays, it's really helpful in understanding the process and how the working groups got to where they are and how we've gotten to where we are right now. So I just really encourage you guys to tune in as you have, and I thank you for tuning in and also share the information with other people.
I don't have any questions either. I just had a couple of comments. Corey talked about possible revenue loss, and there was a question about possible not revenue loss, setting non-resident archery tags at the same number as last year. I think it'll be very interesting and helpful in the long term to see how draw participation is the first year and in the future, how people get used to the draw and possibly those numbers increasing or what the negative effect is initially. I think that will be helpful long term. And then as far as cost replacement goes, qualifying licenses would also be potentially some cost replacement when there's more applications. There's going to be more qualifying licenses needing to be purchased to be able to qualify or to participate in that application. And then as far as resident license fees, they're increased through the legislature and not through CPW. So those were just three kind of clarification things that I had from the previous discussion.
Thank you, Roger and Mia. And yeah, Mia knocked it out of the park. Make sure you're picking up your regulations brochures. I believe big game brochures for people in our corner of the state where mail takes a little bit longer to get from Denver, depending on your post office. Started hitting some residential mailboxes yesterday. Area offices should have those in supply. And then, of course, the big game brochure you can now find on our website. I believe it went up last Friday. So just encourage folks as you're getting ready to apply in the big game draw this year, or if you're getting ready for spring turkey seasons or anything like that, make sure you check out the new regulations brochures and obviously pay attention to those what's new sections. So appreciate that. And Mia and Roger, just want to thank you both for your time and helping us with setting agendas and facilitating these conversations. It's been great having both of you on here as our regional caucus representatives, and look forward to catching up with both of you more in the future as we interact and hopefully get to hunt together someday. So I appreciate it. With that, just one final reminder that if you need licenses or to talk to a customer service representative at the Durango office, starting March 3rd, they will be moving up here to the Bodo location at the Southwest Region headquarters here in Durango at 415 Turner Drive in Bodo. Again, I believe I dropped the link in the chat earlier if anybody wants to learn more about that office move and what's happening there. You can find all that information there. So yeah, with that, with nothing else, we want to thank everybody for tuning in both on YouTube and on Zoom today. Appreciate all the participation, and yeah, we'll look forward to catching up with more of you later.
John, real quick, I just want to make a couple real quick call outs. Commissioner Marie Haskett's on. Appreciate you joining me and Roger. Thanks again. Dan Zimmer, which is over our outdoor recreation and lands. Mindy Pollock, I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag too soon, but she'll be joining us on the statewide Sportspersons Roundtable. And then I actually see, which I'll say I'm impressed, Wyatt DePriest on here, which is one of our newest DWMs that's going through training right now. So sorry I don't see everybody on YouTube, but just noticed those few names on Zoom and wanted to thank everybody again. So thank you.
Just one last comment from Adrian here in the Zoom before we tune out, or turn it off for the night. Adrian says, I'd like to say thank you to all the CPW staff for dealing with everything going on in these contentious times. We value your work, and please keep on keeping on. I'll keep fighting for resident hunter allocation. You guys keep on fighting to represent the science of the animals we all value on the Colorado landscape. So thank you for that, Adrian. Yeah, everybody appreciates the support and the opportunity to work together with our public on managing our shared resources here in Colorado. So really appreciate it. With that, we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, everybody.